Dave's Garage VIP reviewer unit. Prototype sample only. Alright, let's have a look at the Xulu XR1 Max. It's still shrink wrapped. Here's our primary feature list. It's got an AMD Ryzen 7, 8 cores, 16 threads, Radeon GPU, up to 64 gigabytes of LPDDR4. We have SSD slots, up to 3 displays, 7 USB ports, a mini display on the box, Wi-Fi 6E, 4K support, Windows and Linux support. Let's crack it open and see what's inside. Cool little carrying case. Ooh, very fancy. Look at this tiny thing. 2 HDMI, 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, 2 high-speed USB and 2 regular USB. On the front we have one of each as well as USB-C. And you have your audio jack. You can even pull the little tab off here. Fancy. We get a power supply. Let's see. It's got some ratings, but it does not seem to be UL listed. 60 watts roughly, 19 volts. Actually more like 80 watts. 75 watts. Plug it in. Get our little VFD display going. Fan speed and temperature. What else do they give you? HDMI cable. All kinds of stickers. A brochure. And a quick guide. I imagine these are for SSDs and mounting things. All of your basic setup information. So this one is equipped with 32 gigabytes of DDR4, 1 terabyte PCI SSD. I'll dig out my favorite Wera screwdriver set, link in the video description because I love it so much, and we'll use it to pull the top plate off of the Xulu. That gives us our first glance at the pure copper heatsink and the fan that's attached to it in order to manage heat. Now I didn't know yet, but you could just slide it out the front, but let's take the back plate off anyway so we can see what's hidden back here. And through the back we can see the heatsink from the side with the fins and the I/O ports on the back. Let's slide this out of its case and we'll have a look at what's all packed inside. The electronics are of course very dense and everything is packed in here. In order to get it apart, you need to pull the boards off and then disconnect the ribbon cables, which is no fun whatsoever, but at least does give you access to replace pretty much every component that you could imagine except the CPU itself, which is soldered to the board. And back up topside, the first thing we'll do is remove the 3 screws that hold the fan to the copper heatsink. And then with that out of the way, we can pull the actual copper heatsink itself. It's going to be adhered to the chip by compound, so it's going to be a little tough to get off. Don't worry too much, mine came off without a problem. And here you can see the machine pretty much laid bare with the DRAM and the SSD fully accessible because I've pulled the ribbon cables that connect the 2 boards to one another. Now I've noticed a trend on YouTube where people are afraid to put thermal compound on while people are watching. Not me, I don't care what you think. I'm going to spread it as thin as I can so it just fills the imperfections in the 2 mating surfaces and is otherwise the thinnest possible transfer membrane that I can come up with. As long as it's fully coated, I think it works pretty well. And so I will first reattach the heatsink and then we can put the fan back where it came from with its 3 screws that retain it. And now we've looked at what secrets are inside the Xulu, let's put it back together so we can test it out, run some benchmarks, and see how it performs. I'm going to hit it with everything from Geekbench to Furmark, so we'll see how that cooling system manages under real thermal loads. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is run Crystal Diskmark, and it looks like we're getting about 2.4, 2.3 gigabytes per second in sequential read. Not too bad as the blocks get smaller, and we'll see how it performs on the right side as well. Looks like it generates approximately 2 gigabytes a second on the writes, so it's not bad for a PCI 3 fairly small 1 terabyte SSD. The performance on the smallest blocks is not great, but it's better than what I've seen on a lot of other machines. Okay, for this next test, I'm going to mount a drive on my 10 gigabit NAS and we'll see how the network performance is on the 2.5 built-in gigabit Ethernet. Well, I can't quite saturate a 2.5 gigabit on the read side, but when we get to the write side, it actually performs better than it does on the reads for some reason. And we're getting about 300 megabytes a second out to the network, which is actually somewhat over what the 2.5 gigabit Ethernet would be spec for, so I'm not entirely sure how accurate that is, but it seems to be pretty consistent. Next, a quick SSD run of AJA's system tests to make sure that the results are somewhat consistent with what we saw with Crystal DiskMark. And now I'll try it on the network side, again with mapping a drive to my TrueNAS. And we'll run the test again, and we'll see how it does after I select that. And this test confirms what we already saw with Crystal DiskMark, that the writes are actually significantly faster than the reads over the 2.5 gigabit Ethernet. Could be a function of the NAS, but it's able to saturate a 10 gigabit to a certain client, so I don't think it's a restriction on the NAS. I guess it's going to be the speed at which this thing reads. Next, we'll bust out Cinebench R. Holy cow, look how fast that is. That's incredible. Oh wait, that's because I sped up the footage, so you wouldn't have to sit through the full run. But let's see what the score is. Looks like it's going to place at number 4, which is roughly approximate with another Ryzen 7, which sounds properly true. I wonder how many years until we get a CPU that can actually run it this fast in real time. And the final score, 7165. Next, we'll put the Radeon 8 GPU through its paces by throwing Furmark at it. And it looks like we're running around 25 frames per second. Now, the limiting factor on this is actually going to be power draw and the limitation of the 60-watt supply and the total TDW of the chip itself. And if we bust out our handy-dandy task manager, we can see the GPU pegged at 99 to 100%. And some CPU and memory activity going on, but again, this is primarily a GPU test, and it does seem to be fully maxed. Now, with Furmark being a GPU test and Cinebench being a pure CPU test, let's run them both at the same time and see how the little Xulu handles that scenario. Taking a look at some of the temperatures, we can see everything is plateaued around 56 degrees after it's fully heat soaked, and everything is as hot as it's going to get. I'm a little surprised by those earlier slow read speeds on the 2.5 gigabit NIC, so I'm going to try with iPerf, and that'll get SMB out of the way and just give us the raw network connection. 2.48, which is roughly 2.5 gigabits per second, which is exactly what that port is spec'd at. Next, we'll take a look at CPU performance with Geekbench 5. We'll let it run through its entire suite of tests here, sped up a little bit as you can see by the elapsed time ticker, and we'll see what kind of numbers it's able to produce. And it looks like we get a single core score of 1500, which would compare to, say, a Mac M1 at 2300, and a multi-core of 7385, which would compare at around 10,000. Now, of course, the Mac Mini is a much bigger machine and has a beefier power supply, so it does not have the TDP limitations that a tiny form factor like this one is going to have. Next, we'll get a firmer handle on GPU performance by running Geekbench 5 and comparing it to similar systems and seeing where it stacks up. We'll let it run through its Gaussian blur, depth of field, face detection, horizon detection, feature matching, and all the other graphics tests that it does using the system GPU. At the end, we get a score of 15,663. Now that we've seen inside the Xulu XR1 and measured its performance, let's put it all in some perspective and see if it shakes out as something you should actually consider buying. Information on how you can get your own Xulu if you decide to is in the video description, and for transparency, it's not a sponsored link and this is not a sponsored video. The biggest feature, of course, is this unit's size and its portability. The physical dimensions of the XR1 are kind of a marvel in themselves. It measures just 2.5 by 3.8 by 3.5 inches, and it's ultra tiny. But don't let the size mislead you. This device doesn't compromise on the connectivity because with 7 USB ports, including 4 high-speed USB 3 plus a USB-C, the XR1 ensures that all your devices, from peripherals to storage drives, find a seamless connection. Now, my only real complaint with the connectivity of the Xulu XR1 is that it doesn't expose Thunderbolt 4, something that the Latte Panda Sigma single board computer that I reviewed previously did so well. The Sigma could also be powered by that USB-C cable, whereas the Xulu cannot and is reliant on the desktop charger connection for power. My monitor has a built-in KVM over USB-C, meaning that if the Xulu supported it, I'd be able to connect just a single cable for video, power, mouse, and keyboard. But since it doesn't, you're going to wind up with an HDMI, 2 USB, and a power cable at a minimum. For those of you with an appetite for crystal clear visuals, whether it's for entertainment, casual gaming, or professional work, the XR1's 4K resolution support should more than suffice. Better yet, the Xulu supports up to 3 4K displays at once, 2 on the dedicated HDMI ports on the back, and then a third via DisplayPort over that USB-C. And in a world where connectivity dictates our lives, the XR1 stands tall with its ultra-fast Wi-Fi 6E technology. It's not just about staying connected, it's about the speed, reliability, and bandwidth that ensures all your uploads, downloads, streams, and syncs happen reliably and quickly. Now, my office desktop PC is a 5950X, a CPU that felt incredibly fast to me when it was first released, and the Xulu scores about the same 1500 in Geekbench. So for single core performance, I think you'll be more than pleased with the Xulu. The only area in which I think it concedes too much performance is in total system power, which tops out around 60 watts. That limits its total multi-core performance to about 7500 in Geekbench 5, whereas if all 8 cores scored linearly, you'd expect the number closer to approximately 12,000. And thus, the net of it is that the Xulu feels incredibly quick in interactive use, but when you're really loaded up with lots of compute-intensive tasks, you'll find that the multi-core performance does not scale linearly with the core count. All in all, I'm quite impressed with the unit, especially relative to its diminutive size, and I'm pleased that all the major components are serviceable and replaceable. The only catch is that you need to be a near wizard to completely disassemble and reassemble the unit successfully with those tiny little plasticky ribbon cables. But with great serviceability comes great responsibility. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving it a like, and I'd be honored if you would consider subscribing to my channel. If you're already subscribed, please make sure that you haven't been mysteriously unsubscribed in the background and that you've turned on all notifications so that you don't miss episodes with my somewhat chaotic release schedule. If you have any interest in matters related to autism, Asperger's, or ASD, please check out the free sample of my book on Amazon, Secrets of the Autistic Millionaire. It's got nothing to do with money and everything to do with living a successful life on the spectrum, however you define it. Link is in the video description. Thanks for joining me out here in the shop today. In the meantime and in between time, hope to see you next time, right here in Dave's Garage.